He's been really important in lifting up the importance of teaching Black history in K through 12 spaces. And I think that lends itself in opening the door to teach a more full and accurate history, which is the focus of the School of Education's work this year as we are honoring and commemorating the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. Before we get started, we, as is typical for us in the School of Education, is that we do acknowledge the land and the labor that makes possible our work and our ability to be in certain spaces. So here on the Mills campus in Oakland, California, we are on Ohlone land. And so we are conscientious of the fact that this land was not ceded and that it was taken and that people were hurt, people were killed, massacred for this land. And also the unacknowledged, undervalued, and uncompensated labor of so many people to make the possibility of some of this work possible and our existence possible. We ask that wherever you are, we don't assume that everybody is in the Bay Area, we're all over, that you acknowledge within our chat where you're calling in from or zooming in from so that we can acknowledge the land, base, and space that allows us to be here today. Our stories, the actual lived narratives and experiences of our lives are our history. And knowing that history makes it possible for each of us to thoughtfully engage our democracy. This year, during the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action, I'm so very glad that we are joined by Dr. LaGarrett King, who will provide this afternoon/evening's keynote address. We invited Dr. King to speak with our community about the origins of his work with the Teaching Black History Conference and the importance of teaching the full and accurate history to all students. We understand teaching the truth to reflect respect for the learning of our students and their lives. Why is it important from at an early age for children to know and have an accurate understanding of their history? All students, child and adult, deserve to know our shared story and our place in it. Dr. King's work has centered the criticality of doing so with the teaching of Black history. A more complete history that tells the stories of all of us is necessary and is the century-old fight to include Black history in the nation's classroom. And that is the battleground on which the invitation to include all of our histories in this nation's classroom is extended. And what we see being fought for actually every day. There are laws, there are legal proceedings happening right now to restrict what can be taught in America's classrooms today. And we have to ask ourselves the question, what motivates that type of censure? We are pleased Dr. King accepted our invitation. Dr. King received his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin after an 8-year teaching career in Georgia and Texas. His primary research interest examines how Black history is interpreted and taught in schools and society. He also researches critical theories of race, teacher education, and curriculum history. And we should congratulate him. It was recently announced that he will join the University of Buffalo Graduate School of Education as an associate professor of social studies education, and he will be the founder of the University of Buffalo's new Center for K through 12 Black History and Racial Literacy. So let's do some applause in the chat for him. That's wonderful news and so well deserved. He really is a cultural treasure when you think about the work that needs to be done in his time. In these times, Dr. King's work is both sought after and vilified. While he has received 2 early career scholar awards for the Critical Issues in Curriculum and Cultural Studies Special Interest Group of the American Educational Research Association and the College and University Faculty Assembly of the National Council for Social Studies, he has also faced an onslaught of vitriol from a resistant public threatened by a truthful accounting of our humanities story. We are incredibly grateful Dr. King persists in his work. He is a prolific writer, having published in scholarly journals such as Theory and Research in Social Education, Race, Ethnicity in Education, the Journal of Negro History, and Teaching Education. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome Dr. King to our virtual stage. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, and thank you Mills College School of Education, as well as all the community members here who are joining us on the Zoom. That was a wonderful introduction. I've never been called a cultural treasure. So as soon as I hang up, I'm telling my wife that I'm a cultural treasure, right? And I heard that Oakland, California has some beautiful weather. And I'm a little jealous because it's colder than the friend zone here where I'm at, and so we are really going to try to rock and roll. And tonight, I'm so excited to be here. I'm LaGarrett King. I am a consultant. I'm a professor. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a brother. All those various different identities. And I'm here to share some words and some thoughts, and I look forward to engaging in conversation in about 30, 40 minutes. So I appreciate you all having me. So today, or tonight, we're gonna kind of go through what I would call rethinking Black history. And what I wanna do is give credence to the Black Lives Matter School Week aspects of our country who has been doing some wonderful things, leading us and thinking about students on this Black History Month. Then I'll get into the new Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy. I'll talk a little bit about our Teaching Black History Conference, and then we'll kind of get at the crux of the rethinking Black history and give you some resources and Q&A. I will make sure that the planners have links to everything that I speak about, just in case people would like to visit them a little bit later. I saw that the School of Education had some wonderful events this week for the Black Lives Matter week at schools. And I just wanted to give a big shout out for the wonderful work that people are doing all over the country and the world in helping us kind of understand this notion of what does it mean to love and truly love Black students, right? Black History Month has a long history since 1926, actually a little bit before. For those people who are watching, who are part of the Omega Phi Psi fraternity, they always remind me that they created Negro History Week, and Carter G. Woodson just expanded it a little bit, for its popularity. But I love where we're going in February's, right? Whether it's Black History Month, whether it's Black Lives Matter week at schools, or whether it's Black Futures Month, I really enjoy us celebrating Blackness, right? And all of what it means. And just for clarity, February was never intended to be the only time that we engage with Black history. In actuality, Woodson believed that February should be a time of reflection for all the Black history that was learned throughout the year. So kind of think of Black History Month more as an assessment, or better yet, a showcase of all the Black history knowledge that you learn throughout the year. As Dr. Williams mentioned earlier, I'm the founding director of the Center for K-12 Black History and Racial Literacy Education at the University of Buffalo, which is in Buffalo, New York. And we have lots of things that we're trying to accomplish within this week, and within this month, within this semester, within this year, and for many years to come. We believe in quality research through 5 domains, but most importantly, we understand the ways that Black history is done problematically around our country. When we do research, we want to do research on what are the exemplars of Black history around the world, the US and the world. We provide educational opportunities for teachers and students. And we're also a networking place for those who have businesses of Black history, those who research Black history, those who study Black history, and those who just love Black history and racial literacy. And then we also strive to be an advocate for those who need us to be an advocate for. As Dr. Williams mentioned, there's a lot of anti-history laws being passed around the country, and it's really deplorable in what people are really trying to do. And I think it's extremely important for us to come together and fight for what is right. One of our signature programs would be our Black History Nerds. It's just a bunch of nerds on Saturday mornings who just want to learn about Black history. And our first session starts this Saturday. So if you are interested, I'll leave those links with the planners. But we have Dr. Jarvis Givens coming up this Saturday. Next Saturday, the following Saturday will be Dr. Yolanda Sealy Ruiz. After that will be Dr. Leonard Moore. And then last will be Dr. Goldie Muhammad. We will close out the month with all these particular aspects. Please join us if you have time. It will be a little early, for my West Coast Pete, but just enough early where you can get up and grab your coffee and a donut or something like that. So please join us there. It's just a bunch of nerds that just talk for an hour and have a real good time. We also have a research and race series that is March. That's March 15th. So those who are researching race, be on the lookout for that. The first series looks at those who are completing dissertations. And our signature program is our Teaching Black History Conference. These were our first 4 Black History conferences. And this year's conference theme is Mother Africa. Now, this is our 5th anniversary, and this is a very special Teaching Black History conference. And for those who understand how hard it is to build institutions, I think you would appreciate the struggle, right? The hard work that goes into having a conference every single year that deals with themes that people don't want to be out. I'm very delighted to have Mother Africa as our theme this year. And I'm so delighted for our keynote speakers, Dr. Wande Achibe, who is actually the daughter of the famous writer. She's a Michigan State professor. And then Dr. Gloria Boutte and Dr. George Johnson, Doctors Diaspora. And I'm waiting on one more person to confirm, as one of our keynote speakers. But if you've ever been to a Teaching Black History conference, we have hundreds of educators from around the world come and talk about the most effective practices of Black history. It's one of the most life-affirming conferences you will ever go to. And we're so happy to have all these people. So again, I'll leave links for those who are interested in submitting a proposal, or those who just want to come. Registration will be open very soon. So I want to kind of get into this notion of why Black history, why the Teaching Black History Conference. Many people don't know that we've been trying to get this Black history thing in schools right since the 19th century. After the Civil War, after emancipation, one of the first things that Black citizens did after they searched for their families was to learn how to read, to gain their literacy. And how did they gain their literacy? Was through the notions of Black history. So in many ways, these Civil War vets were writing R-I-G-H-T and writing W-R-I-G-H-T, W-R-I-T-E, writing Black history to correct the porous history that was taught to people in the past. So since the 19th century, since the first Black history textbook in 1893, written by Principal Edward A. Johnson for his Black North Carolina school, we have not been able to get Black history right in our schools. In learning about this particular histories, several questions came to mind. And one was, of course, why haven't we got this right? Because we've been doing it for way over a century. And what are the exemplars of Black history? Because we understand through our studies that Black teachers at Black schools taught Black history. So I wanted to create the first national, and it ended up becoming an international conference dedicated to the teaching of K-12 Black history education. Now, of course, you have the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, created by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who created Negro History Week. And they've been going strong for over 100 years. But our Teaching Black History conference deals directly with K-12 educators, because we wanted to create a space, and this is a 3-day space, where teachers can engage, can talk, can discuss, can argue over what are the most effective practices related to Black history. So I go back to the question, why can't we get this right, the Black history education right? We found out in 2020 that a lot of people don't know Black history, not even the simplest aspects of Black history. We understand that most states have electives of Black history education, but not many people take them. We understand that there are some teachers that just don't have the knowledge to teach Black history. And one of the reasons why we can't teach Black history, or we can't get Black history right, is because we don't even know what history is. For some strange reason, we have people around this country that think history is about patriotism. History is about national unity. It's about this notion of building a nation state. It's about making someone feel good about themselves. Now, if you decide to use history like that, then you can use it like that. But history is not about patriotism. It's not about making someone feel good, or even, it's not even about making someone hate something or someone or a country. History is about helping us understand our humanity, whether it's the good, whether it's the bad, whether it's the ugly, or whether it's the indifferent. We also believe in a history and not a histories. In many respects, I tell school districts around the country that, hey, we just need to change this to history to histories, because history with the Y denotes a singular narrative. But when we think about our histories have multiple perspectives. There's no such thing as one history. There's multiple perspectives of history, because multiple groups of people have experienced history differently. And when you deny these multiple perspectives of history, you are denying those people's humanity. We have to realize as well that history is not strictly about facts. Yeah, we know things that happen, but do we necessarily connect it to the big F facts or the little F facts? History is manufactured. History is about telling a story based on the information that we can find. And we understand through racism, through hatred, that many of our documents were destroyed. Many of our landmarks were destroyed, thrown away, erased. And it makes it extremely hard, and particularly those of African descent, our lineage was erased. So the problem with how we struggle with Black history is that in many ways, society doesn't respect Black people's humanity. And history, and Black history, is not just this notion of people with dark skin. There's certain perspectives that are out there for Black history. There's certain interpretations, and there's certain lived experiences. And when people deny and say, you cannot teach history this way, or you cannot teach about Black history, you can't teach about the bad things in history, what are you really saying is that we don't believe in your humanity? Because we understand who we are through our history. Think about the first time that you learned history. I see people on social media many times, they're complaining about their kids, asking them questions. Mommy this, daddy this, daddy this. You know what they're doing? They're trying to understand their history. When they go to their family's house, hey, grandma, tell me how my mother was when she was my age. They're trying to understand history. That's why they giggle and be like, oh, really? You were not perfect either? What? You skipped school? What? You know, you had a boyfriend? You told me I couldn't have a boyfriend until I'm 30. They're trying to understand who they are through you. So when people say, no, I deny you for understanding who you are, they're disrespecting or denying your humanity. When we think about all the problems and why we can't get Black history right, it's the way in which we teach the typical Black history curriculum in our schools. In many Black history curriculum, the first time you meet Black people is through enslavement or European contact. That gives the impression that for some strange reason, your thousands and thousands of years of history before white people found you was not important. Black history typically is who breaks into white society, erasing hundreds and thousands of years of people who did the things they did before we broke into white society, giving the impression that you were only historically important if you broke into white society or the mainstream. And then two, we just ignore the discriminatory aspects of why you're the first to break into that society, but that's neither here nor there. Black history is taught through the first. Black history is based on the triad of experiences, and I am expecting Barack Obama to be high on that experience when new Black history textbooks are rolled out. Black history is tied to suffering. Black history is geared towards Black men who are heterosexual, middle class, and Christian. We ignore all the various different identities that make up Blackness. And then Black history focuses on messiahs and heroes and heroines who are perfect with no complexity. And what that does, and that signals to school children that enable for you to be historically important, you have to be like these manufactured people they put in front of you. What if I'm not a Christian? What if I'm not a heterosexual male? What if I'm not middle class? Can I make a difference? Those are the various different questions when you center those messiahs and those heroes and those heroines. We miss out on all the human attributes of Black history through these manufactured narratives. We prove again that our humanity is always questioned in the classroom, and that's why Black Lives Matter at School Week is here, is that we continue to dehumanize Black children in the classroom. Having Black children go through slave auctions, mock slave auctions in their classrooms, creating slavery math problems and talking about how many times a slave was beaten, having recess games where the teacher, it's the safe house, and you have slaves and you have slave masters and they chase each other around the playground. These things happen every single year in our schools. One of the reasons is because our society does not respect the humanity of Black people. In many ways, what we do is we teach about Black history, but we don't teach through Black history. What do you mean, LaGarrett? I mean, when we teach about Black people through white people's lenses, through the Eurocentric space, through what white people believe we are, who they want us to be. But when we teach through Black history, we teach through their perspectives, Black people's perspectives, their voices, their experiences, their interpretations. That history looks totally different. But dang, Dr. King, I still don't understand. Well, take example, Brown versus Board of Education. I know everybody here knows about Brown versus Board of Education, right? You learned in school that this is probably one of the top Supreme Court cases ever to be decided in the United States. It integrated our schools. It helped erase racism. It was a good thing. But we're teaching about Brown. We're not teaching through Brown, because if we taught through Brown, that narrative looks totally different. Number one, when we learn about Brown versus Board of Education, we get the impression that Black schools were inferior to white schools. That's not the case. If you talk to any seasoned and older Black person who were in segregated schools, and I know my people from Oakland, y'all got family in Louisiana, East Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas. I know. That train went down that way. I know. And when you talk to those people, they would say, man, our education was good. We had culturally relevant teachers. We respected these particular teachers who lived in our communities. Dr. Derek Ulrich from the University of Virginia has this project called Teachers of the Movement. And he has video excerpts of teachers who taught during the Civil Rights Movement. And they talked a little bit about when they integrated into these white schools. And one participant said, when I got to that class, I looked around, I'm like, these people are not smarter than me. These people don't have better teachers than we do. But we don't teach through Black people's perspectives. It wasn't about no integration. Actually, the Black community was a little bit upset with the NAACP. But the NAACP knew they couldn't win based on fairness. Who do they think they at? United States of America? I mean, Plessy had already said, you can't win based on equity now. But it wasn't about white and Black people being in schools together, not at that time. It was about this notion of money, more funding, better textbooks, better buildings, transportation, all these particular aspects that made it a little harder for our Black babies to learn it during that time. If we taught through Black history, we would understand that when we say integration, we're not talking about white people integrating into Black spaces. We're talking about Black people integrating into white spaces. So what do you think happened? Black teachers lost their jobs. Black principals either lost their jobs or were demoted. We lost a little bit of community. And let's not talk about the racism that these students felt. When I was at Clemson University, and I think we had a panel of people who first integrated their schools in the 70s, because with all deliberate speed, a lot of school districts didn't even integrate until the 70s. Some school districts, particularly in the South, didn't want to integrate at all, so they just closed their public schools completely. They didn't want to go to school with Black people that bad. They were just like, you know what, man, let's just close it up. But then we don't even talk about that history, right? Because if you look up the founding dates of most parochial schools and private schools, you will see an interesting connection to the time of Brown versus Board. So a lot of poor white children was left out of education for 4 years because people didn't want to integrate in the Black schools. I mean, integrate with Black people. So you had all these private and parochial schools sprung up during that time for all the middle class and rich white kids to go so they wouldn't miss out on their education. But we don't teach through Black history. We don't teach through Black people. We teach about them. Going back to the racism aspect and the panel, one student asked a really good question. Asked the panelists, how did you handle racism from your classmates? And overwhelmingly, the panel said, we didn't experience racism from our classmates. Remember, these people probably were in elementary school at that time. So they remember not experiencing racism from their classmates, but what they did say was, we experienced racism from our teachers. Think about that, people. You had a whole generation of kids who knew their teachers did not like them. And again, if you teach through Black people and through Black history, when did the achievement gap discourse begin to become popular? During the 70s. Now, if you teach through Black history, you see how the narrative switches from the narrative that you've learned. Now, maybe y'all are some super scholars and everybody on this call knew about that, right? So I do apologize for boring a lot of you all. But for some of you all who may not have known, may have missed it because you had a sick day and didn't get to class. But the narrative looks totally different when we teach through Black people instead of teaching about Black people. So what we need to understand about history education and history in general is that what is historically important to white people is not necessarily historically important to Black people. It's just not. What is historically important to white people is not necessarily historically important to Black people. It's Black History Month. And I see a lot of people, Black history is American history. It's American history, and we say it with pride, and everybody and people who say that, you are right. You are factually right. You cannot teach about US history. You cannot teach about world history without teaching about Black history, but I don't think people really understand what they're saying. In reality, Black history is not really the American history that we see now. The American history that we envision when we say Black history is American history, we envision a fantasy. But the American history that we have now, Black history doesn't belong there. Because in many ways, Black history has its own entry points. I know with the 1619 controversy all over the country, you have heard about origin stories. What is the origin story of America? Is it 1619? Is it 1492? Is it 1526? Is it 1776? Is it 1865? Like, you have all these origin stories. Like Batman, and there's another Batman coming out, and I don't know why we have another Batman. It doesn't look good, but that's neither here or there. I want to be a film critic, beforehand. But we have all these origin dates. And that does not necessarily fit within Black history. The origins of Black history did not start in 1492. The origins of Black history did not start in 1526. Black history in the United States may have started in 1619, but we're missing thousands and thousands of years of history if we start with 1619, right? 1865, right? That's a good origin story, because some people would say with the implementation of the 13th Amendment, 14th and 15th Amendment, now we are the United States, or whatever the case may be, whatever. All these dates are important. But my point is, when you talk about Black history, the entry points, the origin story is totally different than what we learn in school. The 1619 Project was a beautiful project that helped us understand that there is a different interpretation of the United States story. That entry point is very important, but there's several different entry points before as well that we can add. Timelines. There's different historical timelines. Perspectives and voices. There's different perspectives and voices when we talk about Black history. And notice, with Black history, there's a tendency, right? Particularly when we talk about freedom, there's a tendency to state in Black history, the only way Black people can achieve freedom is through nonviolence. Nonviolence is the most appropriate way to achieve freedom. No, it's not. It's not. We live in the United States of America. The creation of this country was born off of freedom. Freedom was born off of violence. You ever heard of the American Revolution? Ever heard of the Civil War? Ever heard of, no, okay. You know, for people that didn't hear me, I didn't say, I'm not advocating for violence. I'm saying when we talk about notions of freedom and what are the most important aspects of our country in achieving freedom, violence has been an answer. But what are we saying in our history curriculum that only white people and white men can achieve violence for freedom? Everyone else has to be passive and get beat down and scowled and all this stuff for them just to have the right to achieve their humanity? Let me move on before I get in trouble. And when we teach through Black history, we have to understand and we have to accept that sometimes Black people are gonna be upset because of that history. When you construct a Black history where you don't even touch on Black anger, you're not teaching Black history. Black people have never been these happy-go-lucky, joyous, shucking and jiving folk that say, oh, thank you, sir, we appreciate it. And that's the way in which the history curriculum situates Black folk in the curriculum. Dr. Williams, I'm sorry. So the president on the line and stuff like that, President, please excuse me. I am so sorry about that. But how can we correct Black history in our schools? And I think it's extremely important for us to understand when I say Black history is not American history, what I'm saying is that when we talk about Black history, there's certain things that we need to really understand. And since we are teaching, since our goal is to teach through Black history, we need to have what I would call a historical consciousness, or a Black historical consciousness, meaning that in many ways, we have to think through Black people to create these narratives. And so there's several different school districts around the country that have adopted my Black history framework that helps us teach through Black history. So if you're developing Black history curriculum, Black studies curriculum, for your community organizations, for your school districts, for your teacher ed programs, I want you to consider 8 principles as you build those curriculum. I don't go, I don't do standards. Standards are red herrings. And I believe not all curriculum should look alike. But these principles will help you kind of think through how you should shape your Black history curriculum. So, principle 1, you cannot teach Black history without teaching about systemic power, oppression, and racism. Sorry, folk, but that is an important construct in our history. It has and it has continued to influence the lived realities of Black people, from healthcare, from education, from all different walks of life. Systemic racism still exists. It has existed, and it probably will exist for the near future. And it's extremely important for us to approach that in our Black history curriculum. Principle 2 is about this notion of teaching about Black agency, resistance, and perseverance. You can't teach about oppression without teaching about the various different ways Black people fought against that oppression, whether it's reactive, preactive, whatever the case may be. And then also, when we talk about agency, we need to be very cognizant that agency looks different in different ways. Many times when we talk about agency, most people go straight to kind of the physical and violence, right? Like, race revolts and all these particular aspects. But agency also is passive, working slow, right? Breaking things, right? Not coming to work. All those things are part of aspects of agency. Principle 3 is teaching about Africa and the African diaspora. It's extremely important to understand that Blackness is global, right? And that there's similarities and differences with all different Black communities across the globe. Principle 4 is teaching about Black joy. Black people are not always fighting for liberation. They're not always sad and oppressed. A lot of times they're just trying to make the best of their life. They're human. And we miss out on that joyous aspect in our history. Now, it's very difficult because there's a delicate balance of creating a Black history that doesn't trivialize oppression, right? But it's also very important for us to feature joyous histories. Principle 5 is teaching about Black identities. Remember, Black history is focused on Black men who are heterosexual, who are middle class, who are able-bodied and Protestant. We need to teach about the various different identities of Black people. Black historical contention is probably the most controversial one, because in many ways, we overcompensate by the absence of Black history. So when we develop curriculum that's overly positive, right? We don't critique Blackness in Black history. We don't critique the problematic aspects of Black history when we develop Black history curriculum. If we truly believe that history is about humanity, we have to demonstrate our full humanity, right? So that may be mean that we need to teach that when Black Americans and Black Canadians developed those colonies in Africa, Sierra Leone and Liberia, that means we may have to teach that those people enslaved those native people in those places. They did the same thing that was done to them when they were in the US and Canada. We may need to talk about that a little bit, because what happened all the way in the 1800s still influences those countries now. If you read about what's happening in those countries, and typically it's the Liberians who were descendants of America, continuing to oppress the native people of those particular places, right? Those are the things that maybe need to be put into those Black history curriculum. Principle 7 is the notion about teaching Black social histories. We are too top down with Black history, and we need to make sure that we teach about regular people, right? And regular people's, histories. Those are very important because I believe you actually learn more history when you teach from the below, right? And not from top down. And last one, teach Black futures. This is an instructional approach. And what this means is when we teach Black history, we need to help our students use Black history to solve contemporary and future problems. What Black futures is a society that has not been interrupted by Europeans. That's all Black Panther was. That's all what all the Black futurism is what society will look like if there was not any colonization or interruptions from Europeans. So when we take it in this context, using Black history knowledge to solve problems in the contemporary and the future, what we're doing is we're giving students the permission to think for the future using their historical knowledge. Why is that important? Because I visit many classrooms where students always ask the teacher, well, why is it like that? And the teacher says, because we've always done it like that. When we teach Black futures, we are giving those students permission to think for their future. So when they become adults and in positions of power, they cannot say this has never been done before because they've already thought about it while they were students. That's why Black futures is extremely important. And that's the power of Black history. So as I close, I think we have some time for some questions here. I'm gonna leave you with some basic resources. There's tons of resources out there, but I wanted to leave you with a few resources. If you want to take a picture of the screen, you can, but I'll definitely give the planners the links to all these particular things. Shout out to Leonard Moore by writing the book, Teaching Black History to White People. Is a wonderful book, easy to read, and gives some very good lessons in there for things. So I'll close with the founder of Black History Month, Carter G. Woodson, one of the godfathers of Black history, when he said instruction with respect to the life and history of the Negro requires probably more preparation than any other phase of social science for the simple reason that no other problems have been so grossly misinterpreted and so generally misunderstood. To undertake to give instruction in this field in which one is not prepared, then would be a most expensive error for which future generations must pay in suffering from other misunderstandings like the many which handicap us today. Woodson wrote this in 1929, and we can definitely say the same thing. We can change Negro to Black, because I don't think you want to call anybody Negro right now. But it's the same sentiment. Our handicap is our tendency to default back to racism. And one of the main reasons why we continue to default back to racism is because we don't know our history. And Black history is a very extremely important part to that history. But in terms of elementary, right, I think there are several different ways that you can kind of go with elementary. For the younger, like the younger kids, pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, and third, we typically kind of use more of a family history, a critical family history approach, right? To that. So instead of doing the, kind of the basic family tree type of thing where they use, their hands and they do the things, what we do is actually have students and parents collaborate, right? And in those particular critical family histories, kind of use interviews, use certain concepts such as race, economics, and gender to kind of talk about how their family became their family, right? And family is defined broadly, right? So if you note movement, right? Movement has had either notions of race in it, gender in it, or notions of economics in it, right? And so we really try to kind of delve into that particular aspect for the students. Typically for early age, we go from ourself to our communities, to our nation. So, for the very young kids, we always focus on themselves and their particular families. As they get older, then we start kind of looking through notions of race, class, and gender and kind of explaining what that is for them.
Just that today we had a wonderful, it just really sticks to Cheryl's question. So I want to just say that our head of school, so Black woman, Dr. Debbie Brown, read Born on the Water to our 4th and 5th graders. And it was a beautiful experience. And one of the things that she did, one, it's a children's story, but it's still a heavy story. She asked the children to write, she told them about how painful it was for her to learn her family story and how her family grappled with that. And that because emotions can be complex, for them to write down their emotions and their experience, how they're feeling at different points of the story. So just going to your point that the gruesomeness is not necessarily the point, it's really to help the children to process what they're hearing.
I was going to say literature, children's literature as well, before Dr. Williams noted that. Yeah, just keep the faith. I mean, just know that you're not making up things. You're teaching history. If there are concerns in your local school district, the best thing you can do is, the beautiful thing about history is that we don't have to indoctrinate anybody. We don't have to tell anybody nothing. All we got to do is show them the proof, have them read it for themselves and call it a day. When the vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stevenson, in his counterpoint essay said, the Confederacy is all about white supremacy and Black people are inferior. That's history, y'all. I didn't say it. This man said it, right? You can pull all these primary source documents. You don't have to indoctrinate anybody. You don't have to tell anybody how to think. You don't have to, and that's the beautiful thing about history. You just show them the proof. And that's it. So just know and stuff that I got your back. When I was going through all my stuff, I had people all over the country having my back. We all have our backs, and if no one loves us, we love each other. A lot of people like to talk about democracy and talk about citizenship and talk about coming together. My biggest argument that anybody could say in defense of critical histories would be, when we learn history, we learn about our society. And for us to be effective citizens, we have to understand all of our citizens. When you deny us from learning about half of our population, you deny us from having a great democracy. And that's it.
Thank you.
Dr. King, we're not going to keep you all night because we could keep you too. Thank you so much for your time with us today. I think that I can speak for everyone and say we're just incredibly grateful for you and grateful for your work. You can tell your family that we consider you a cultural treasure. We do. And we're just so appreciative of having the opportunity to not learn only from you, but with you, because it seems like this is a journey that we're all on, figuring out our best ways and our best steps forward and through. Any last words you'd leave us with before we close out for the evening?
Oh, no, well, thank you so much for inviting me. Hey, if y'all have some wonderful proposals for teaching about Africa, please submit to the conference. And I would love to see you all in Buffalo, New York.
Oh gosh, okay.
Over the summer.
Okay, maybe that will work.
Yes. Well, Buffalo, New York over the summer. The conference is July 22nd through the 24th.
Okay.
So it is a hybrid conference. So if you don't feel comfortable going to Buffalo, you can still access it at home. But I would love to, see you all and engage. I'm telling you, is one of the best experiences ever.
We've been promoting the conference, and what I can commit to is supporting at least 5 students registration for the conference.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.